We're in. Yeah, thanks. Welcome, everybody, and it's nice to be back in the chamber. Welcome to Alice. I think it's your first cabinet meeting, is it not? And to Paul. Is there Paul Sart? What's the full title, Paul? Head of Finance. That's it. It's not too long, then. Not too long on that. OK, we'll move for the apologies for absence. None? OK. And I'll move the minutes. Item 2 approves correct record the minutes of the meeting held on 20th of May 2021. They're on page 5 to 7. We'll move those. Seconded.
Just on the minutes, Leader, if I may. I did raise in the previous meeting, I did it under the forward plan, issues in relation to the Highcroft surgery. And I am slightly disappointed to see that there's not even a passing reference in the minutes to the issue being raised. It's an important issue for the local community. And I'm disappointed that there isn't even a line in there, given that I spoke on the issue, Councillor McCrossan spoke on the issue, Councillor Wheeler spoke on the issue, and effectively we may as well have not had the conversation if it hasn't been recorded in the minutes. So if that could be rectified, it'd be helpful. And just in saying that, which I was going to say anyway, I just wanted to commend Councillor Henry Wheeler, who, following on from the meeting, I'm not sure what action officers took or didn't take, the Chief Executive was asked to take the issue up. Councillor Wheeler pressed the issue with senior health officials and did meet with the surgery and continues to hold the surgery to account on behalf of local residents. So on behalf of everybody, Henry, and the council, thank you for the work that you've done. I know we then did see a number of other people locally muscling in on your hard work, but you have made the run-in on this issue, and I think it's quite right that you have done, because we continue to hear concerns and frustrations about it. So at some point in the future, which is the point I made under the forward plan, in the previous meeting, I would like us to have a report back here through officers, which I know Councillor Wheeler will be very keen to feed into, about health provision, maybe not just at Highcroft surgery, but actually in terms of the wider borough, because this continues to be a concern and issue for the residents that we serve. So if I can just ask Democratic Services to make sure that there is a reflection in the minutes that go up online and are recorded, at least a line that concerns were raised by councillors in Cabinet about issues that have been fed through to them by residents in Highcroft surgery. That would be very much appreciated to correct the record. Thank you, Leader. I second the minutes.
Thanks, Michael. Fran, how do we legally do that? Do we bring it?
We can add it into the reference for approval of the minutes on this round, yeah.
We are all agreed. Thank you. So we're moving on to the next item, which is the declaration of interest. I need to declare. Non-declared. Thank you. And there's lots now with the finances, so it'll probably be Michael dealing with that more than anything, but we've got the two experts in the room, so we can ask questions there. So, item 4, annual report to Senior Information Risk Owner, and that's report to Director of Corporate Resources.
Yes, thank you, Leader. So this report presents the annual report on information governance from the Senior Information Risk Owner for 2021, a role that was designated to the Director of Corporate Resources myself under the Senior Management Restructure. Just by way of background, the report provides a summary of the information governance activity across the Council to provide assurance that information risks are being effectively managed. The key priorities of information governance are to focus on the risks to the confidentiality, the integrity and the availability of information assets, and to manage them in a balanced way to ensure that we can fulfil our statutory obligations and support our service delivery. So this covers both our paper and electronic information, and key components of our assurance is to ensure that the security of both of those through our IT system security and effective data protection processes. You will see in the report that COVID pressures have impacted on the delivery of some planned actions in 2021. That said, we've not been complacent, and there has been a lot of constructive activity during the year as set out on page 17. This provides assurance for us that governance remains effective. For example, key tasks that have been undertaken this year include virtual data protection annual refresher training, which was developed by the data protection team and delivered with the majority of staff completing this during the year. We've still got some more work to do on that, but they'll all be completed this year. and actually training for members will also be rolled out in the current financial year as well. We completed a cyber risk internal audit, and that included a high-level review of the information security policy, which was due for update and approval by Cabinet during last year. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we didn't get that completed. That was delayed, but will now come forward for approvals by Cabinet during this financial year. That cyber risk internal audit did just identify one low-risk action, so our existing information security policy is okay. Similarly, the risk management strategy was due for refresh as well, and that has also been deferred to this financial year. In terms of information requests, responses to external requests for information have remained effective throughout the year. We have received a similar number of requests last year compared to the previous year, and there were no complaints to the Information Commissioner regarding those responses. The number of information data breaches reported at 44 were also similar in number to the previous year, and they were mainly minor in nature with no systemic issues identified, and none of those needed reporting to the Information Commissioner. Officers are still engaging well with the process, which is effectively supported through the refresher and induction training that legal services provide. Actions in respect of data protection compliance included a review of the contracts review of information asset registers and data sharing agreements, and we did update the record and retention disposal policy, which was approved by Cabinet in November. Unfortunately, within the report, we're saying that that is a planned action for this year, but actually that has already been done and was completed during last year. And we did update the housing needs system and ensured that was upgraded to ensure that was data protection compliant. There were no cybersecurity incidents involving malware or hacking during last year. Phishing attempts are on the increase, which is a national trend, but all were prevented through a combination of technical controls and staff vigilance. Clearly, that's not an area where we can rest upon our laurels, and risks can never be fully eliminated, but continuous improvements in our cybersecurity mitigation measures are key. And actions were completed during the year to keep those up to date. We had the completion of the cyber risk audit. We improved our software patching approach and firewalls. We continued the upgrade of our remaining Windows 7 and legacy systems. And we've still got a little bit more work to do, and we hope to get those completed early in quarter 2 of this year. And following that, we should then secure PSN compliance. A full review of the cyber risk and the cyber risk registers will be completed in the new year, and cyber risk training will be rolled out in the new year as well. There was a planned IT disaster recovery rehearsal for last year, but unfortunately that was deferred due to COVID because the company couldn't come out onto site. But I am pleased to report that has now been completed. It's just been done, and the actions arising from that will come into SLT for consideration. So just to conclude, the review of the assurance framework confirms that the process has remained effective. Huge credit due to data protection officers and the IT team, and to all officers generally for their continued vigilance and engagement with the processes. But as I've said, continuous improvements and ongoing review is really key in this area. It's not something that we can sit back on. So the recommendation there, Leader, is to note the annual report, and that's set out on page 9.
Thanks, Alison. Any comments? Michael? No? None? Sorry, we're asked to note it. Agreed. Thank you. Moving on to item 6. Leadership team.
System. We've outlined for you some of the ways in which we're monitoring performance in relation to satisfaction. How do we know how we're getting on? Of the 96 actions due for completion this year, 90 were completed, which I hope you'll agree is an outstanding performance given the conditions under which we were working. Of those outstanding, they will be carried forward to the next year for completion. and in the main were outstanding due to us redirecting resource towards the pandemic effort. We've outlined in section 2.2 of your report what those actions are. So we couldn't conclude the year without really summarising the response to the pandemic. We've included indicators for the pandemic and note that Richard Herod Centre continues in its role now as a vaccination centre, and discussions are ongoing into September and beyond. Section 2.3 of your report outlines the indicators that are reported on an annual basis, and we've noted there that 5 indicators exist for which we don't have data available. So I think it's fair to say there is a mixed picture amongst many achievements this year. We can see in frontline services for growth that we have positive performance outlined in section 2.4 of the report, but then areas where targets were missed, so for example our additional homes. But we did have 65 long-term properties that were empty returned to use. In terms of public protection and the environment, I'm sure councillors are aware that we have a range of work to do in this area, particularly in relation to our recycling and waste. But it is good to note that over 1,000 trees were planted despite the pandemic, and only 1% of our streets were of a not acceptable litter level, although of course that could be due in part to streets being a little quieter. Support to the most vulnerable. Again, we have a slightly mixed picture. Some excellent work with customer services with our most vulnerable, but the focus is clear. Where we need to be headed is working on that temporary accommodation list now, and there are a lot of plans underway to address this. In terms of customer services and communication, again, there have been some good results, in part supported by the move online. We can see that our Keep Me Posted is now having over 37,000 subscribers, which is quite an achievement. The communication strategy and plan is one of the elements of actions in this area that will be moved into next year in order to push us forward even further. So our areas of concern, as we mentioned, sit across waste, recycling and temporary accommodation. We can see our focus, and we'll still need to balance that with our continued efforts towards the pandemic. We've undertaken some further initial analysis of complaints, compliments and MP letters. And so you can see a trend here between 2014-15 up to last year. And it's clear that volumes of complaints and compliments are increasing. We have further work to undertake to understand the analysis sitting behind that data. We can see that people are at the heart of what we're doing. So most of the compliments coming in relate to our teams. And then finally, partnerships remain absolutely critical to our success moving forward. Most of those we'll be well aware of, but they are going from the high-level partnerships right the way down to our operational partnerships that I think will be increasingly important. So in summary, Chair, what we're asking Cabinet to do is to note our progress against the actions and indicators for the year 2020-21 in the Gedling plan, and we're happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Alice. Any questions? Michael?
Just to commend Alice for a superb presentation, very, very clear and cogent, and I think spells out the significant achievements, but also areas where progress still needs to be made, and to thank the wider SLT and indeed every single member of our staff, because I think if you look, you know, we've just faced the worst public health crisis since the Second World War in this country. The last 18 months has not only been tough for residents, for businesses, for the communities, but also for our staff here at the council. And I think to have got a score sheet and a record sheet like the one we've just heard in terms of a year-end report in the presentation that Alice has just given is pretty remarkable, really. And I think that the areas for concern, yes, are areas for concern, but can be understood in the wider context of of some of the issues in terms of how they sit. So on waste and recycling, we know there have been issues around the Frith Street fire at the facility there and the impact that's had. We know, obviously, in terms of housing and house building, that some of that was put on hold by developers early on in the pandemic. Quite confident with the local plan that we've got, obviously going through a new process with Council Hollingsworth in terms of renewal of the local plan. But the other thing I don't think that should be lost here, John, in all of this, and I know has been the subject of some public discussion in recent weeks, is that this borough continues to be a place that has absolutely brilliant green infrastructure. And in the last 18 months, people's streets and people's parks and people's town centres have become their world because they've not been able to travel much further. And I think it's fantastic to see that we now have 4 green flag parks in the borough, with an additional park coming on stream in terms of green flag parks. Gedling Country Park growing from strength to strength. Bestwood Country Park growing from strength to strength. Some amazing work being done by the Friends of the Hobbocks in Councillor Wheeler's ward. We've obviously got the Netherfield Lagoons and other fantastic areas of beauty. And I think we are so blessed to have such a green borough, and that is in no small part down to the hard work of our staff. Indeed, actually, I don't know whether people can hear this if they're listening to the meeting now, but our park rangers are working in this part here now. I can hear them outside, and I've seen residents from my own ward who volunteer their time here in the park to make it such a beautiful space for young people to enjoy, older people to enjoy, and families to come enjoy as well. So I just wanted to say, John, in terms of this report, a huge thank you to all of our staff and to elected members, actually, who have shown community leadership, but particularly to thank Alice for the presentation. I thought it was a really, really clear and cogent presentation that teases out the significant achievements, but also touches on the areas of concern. Let me just, while I've got the floor, take an opportunity to thank Alison Ball and all of the team in terms of finance. I don't know whether people caught it there on the presentation, but to have got nearly £30 million out of the door to our businesses through more than 15 different schemes, some of which had to be hand administered and were very prescriptive in terms of the government's guidance, I think is absolutely commendable. And I know how hard Alison and the entire team worked, often late into the night, at the same time that they had to be reporting back to the government in terms of the Delta returns about money's spent, money's gone out the door, what monies hadn't been spent, you know, how things were going in terms of the pandemic. They were getting money out of the door in terms of helping our businesses, but not only our businesses. What you also saw there in the presentation was hundreds of thousands of pounds being sent to families who otherwise would have been in destitution in terms of the pandemic. And in no small part, I'm very proud that that was helped by the fact that we still have a 100% council tax reduction scheme here, which is a scheme that protects hard-working families from being pushed into poverty by a council tax bill that they cannot afford to cover because the government, at its infinite wisdom back in 2013-14, decided to withdraw council tax support, council tax benefit for working families who are struggling to make ends meet while they're in work, which I think is a travesty in a country like ours, that people who are working sometimes cannot make ends meet. So I just wanted to put on record my thanks, John, in relation to that, but I thought it was a really, really good presentation by Alice.
Thanks, Michael. I agree with all the words that's said there. It's also there'll be some extra work soon because I understand that the £20 support on universal credit is soon to be removed, which is going to add some more weight to your department, Alice. Right, I've got 2 people indicating. One's Viv and one's Peter.
I just I totally agree with everything that Councillor Payne has said. I just want to add in terms of open spaces, without saying that the brilliant work that Friends of Breckhill Park and the council have done to create a really transformational open space, and they're having an event coming up soon to celebrate that. So I just wanted to add that to it. Thank you.
Peter.
Yeah, can I just say, I mean, I've been on this council the best part of 40 odd years now, and I think the staff at this council must be the best staff in England. We've got some of the most dedicated members who work for this borough, and I think this 12 months has shown them at the real top of the tree, and they've done extremely well, from the lads who collect the bins, from the people who come to the park, to the people in the offices. I think service for this council has been absolutely first class, and I think they should all be congratulated.
Thanks. No one else? Okay, we're asked to note that. That's on page 21. Are we agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Page 43. Now I'll get to agenda item 6. So, thank you. Who's doing that?
That's back to me.
Yeah,
Thank you, Chair.
Back to you, Alice.
So this item is a summary of Council's work in an unusual year, which I think we've all just noted. It includes, as such, the pandemic response alongside service-based successes for you as an annual report. As Councillor Clark has noted in the introduction, the ethos in terms of serving people and improving lives has just never held true for Gedling. From the memorial stone to the volunteers, the effort has been amazing. Giving for Gedling and the humanitarian centre, I think, was unique for the borough, and just really demonstrated some of the sentiments that have already been passed by the Cabinet today. The winter grants effort, the grants overall, the testing centres, the befriending service and the vaccinations are all reflected within the annual report to give what we hope has captured a real flavour of the year so that we can put this publicly, both internally and externally. The measures show 500 volunteers, over 60,000 vaccinations delivered so far, and I know that's been vastly exceeded already. No one thought this would form a key part of an annual report for a council such as ours going forward, but these are the times we found ourselves in. In terms of the areas, I'll take a quick trot through some of the highlights. The cohesive and diverse, safe communities. I think a highlight there is the consultation that's been undertaken with young people, the equality and diversity policy, the housing benefit exceeding target, achieving 12.6 days against the target of 13. In terms of high-performing council, to have got a Gedling lotto off the ground with everything else that we've had to deal with, I think is a huge achievement and well reflected in the annual report. We've also delivered online taxi applications, quickly rolled out remote working, and had, as we said earlier, nearly 40,000 people on Keep Me Posted. In terms of our vibrant economy aims, Arnold Marketplace continues to progress, and I'm sure will be a huge addition, really securing that end of the high street. On the bigger elements, we've continued partnerships to look at the access road and the Nottingham strategic plan. 59 affordable homes were achieved against a target of 20, and it's critical that work's continued. The sustainable environment, the country park, of course, the green flag has been mentioned, and the over 1,000 trees. And on healthy lifestyles, finally, the accessible changing that's come in, the improvements where officers and members took the opportunity of the pandemic to continue to make improvements and not just think, well, we'll try and manage this. The one step at a time delivery has been exemplary, and over 95% of our premises are achieving their food hygiene at level 4 or 5. And alongside that, we've also delivered on social prescribing with closer relationships being built with the NHS. So, Chair, that is the annual plan, annual report going forward, and we're seeking approval today for the publication of the 2021 report, both internally and externally.
Thanks, Alice. Can I ask there, what you said to publication internally, externally, can we send one along to the Prime Minister with a suitable letter saying this is local government at its best? Same to Rishi Sunak and the chair of the DCN, Councillor Fuller, and Jake Jacobson, the LGA chair. That's right. So they're fully aware, because I don't think quite still the message has got to government that without the local authority it would have been a lot more difficult to carry out some of the things they've done to fight this awful pandemic. Thank you. Anyone? Michael?
Just two very brief points, if I may, on the annual report, John. The strapline of the council is serving people, improving lives, and we mean it. You know, they're not just words on a page. But I think what has been truly remarkable throughout this pandemic, and indeed before, is that there are also people in the community serving their community, as well as the council playing its role. And I just wanted to pay particular tribute, because these things often get lost. On page 55 in the Cabinet report, page 8 in the annual report, 21 Gedling residents volunteered for the South Nottinghamshire Telephone Befriending Service and made 837 calls to 41 Gedling Borough residents who otherwise would have been on their own, lonely and isolated throughout the pandemic. And I think that is remarkable testament of human compassion and people stepping up to the plate at what was the most difficult time to make sure that those people who probably didn't have any other friend than their television or their radio were not left on their own. And I think they deserve our absolute admiration and commendation. And just secondly, I want to pay tribute to particularly to Councillor McCrossan and Councillor Barnes and Councillor Gregory, but the wider team in terms of the Cabinet for the coordination of the community litter picking that's going on across the borough. Yet again, hundreds and hundreds of residents, be that in Emma Green's team in Killissit, be it in Carlton Hill and the work that they're doing, be it the people at Breck Hill, Mapley Top, Netherfield, the Willow Tree, around the Willow Tree Lane development, in Gedling Village, where Councillor Hollingsworth represents, the Arnold litter pickers who have recently set up, scores and scores of groups just appearing like green shoots across the borough, flourishing and taking care of our borough by litter picking. And I just think that that should be commended. And actually what is truly remarkable about it is we are now increasingly seeing young children who are going out with their parents, with their grandparents, getting stuck into these community groups to tidy up our borough. And I think, again, those people deserve our admiration and our commendation, John, because they are local people doing their bit to make sure that our borough is safe, clean and green. There might be people who think out there in the public that this council doesn't care about safe, clean and green. Well, let me just say to them very, very clearly, it does, and so does its residents. And I think that's borne out in this annual report. So I just wanted to pay tribute and thanks to those people.
Thanks, Michael. And it's those that are organised and those that, as you said, aren't organised. I've seen several people throughout the borough and throughout this last 18 months with, grandparents and children there. It's a good message to get there, take your litter home. Viv.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to add to that, the enthusiasm for people wanting to go out to make their communities, be a lovely place to live has just been amazing. A couple of points, just to add in terms of my thanks to officers and for this council. I think you're absolutely right, Michael. It's about serving people. So the important thing that we do is listen to people. And we've had two big consultations, one still ongoing, the consultation with young people. If we're thinking about our young people, we need to listen to our young people, and that's been a tremendous piece of work. And I'd like to thank all officers that have really supported myself and my policy advisor, Catherine Fox, for that. We've heard from 230 young people, and we've got more to do in terms of that. And also the ongoing consultation regarding our policies and action plans on equality and diversity. And we really, again, thanking officers and our media team, comms team, in terms of the work they're doing to ensure that we really get the message out that we want to hear from everybody in our borough in terms of their views on the work that we're doing, because that will make us an even stronger and better a council listening to people. So thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Gary?
Yeah. I think working with the community, even I've worked for 20 odd years now, but even this time, I've been absolutely amazed, from older ones to younger ones, how they've all wanted to join in. And I think the more that you work with them, I know it's been hard and it's going to be harder than ever, but to associate and to get in with those people, they do accept and appreciate that you're making that effort. With the litter picking, we're moving on in Cavendish Ward from doing, we're not scrapping it all together, but we're not doing from one specific place. Because at the moment, after the 6 weeks holiday, I've got the primary school and the junior school and the secondary school all want to come out with the children to do that, because they're quite sort of engaged on what they want to do in their area. So the hardest part is with the junior ones, is getting them in one particular area where we've got enough staff where they don't feel penned in, but they're actually part of the community. So I think as regards that, we are moving forward, we will move forward, and the community will still be there. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Jenny?
Yes, thanks, Leader. I just want to comment on the page 53, the vibrant economy, and thank our staff who've carried on right through the pandemic, developing employment and skills opportunities, running a successful apprenticeship fair this year, and exploring science options for people. Had to be done virtually, but by and large it was quite successful, and lessons have been learned to take that forward. I also think it's important to point out the partnership working that goes on with the council. We don't work in isolation. We collaborate with a lot of other agencies, and we support them and they support us. So I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all those people who come along to our employment and skills group and support getting people back into work, getting them retrained, arranging apprenticeships and work experience opportunities. Also like to thank our planning development staff who've again worked right through the pandemic, developing strategic plans and analysing the growth options that will take us forward into the future, and the work of the Joint Planning Advisory Board, which is a collection of all the councils in the Nottinghamshire housing area, and the way we work collaboratively together. But in particular, I'd like to thank the staff who've worked all the way through that the COVID pandemic. It's been amazing what they've been able to achieve. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. And just looking at this is really only the tip of the iceberg. There are loads and loads, and you probably have reams, like an old family Bible, if people can remember those, of people that are doing the work. And I was particularly pleased visiting Netherfield, St George's the other day, still delivering with the help of this council, but the work of dedicated people in the kitchen there, and Tina and her team, 100 meals a day being cooked, from scratch, thanks to Morrison's, thanks to all the other people that have been donating into it. And we've used some of the money that was left in the fund of the hub. So I say it's only the tip of the iceberg. The ringing people, if you ask people, I know we asked members to ring people, and there's nothing more sort of satisfying in a way than when you do ring somebody up and say, why have you rung me? And say, well, are you all right? Are you okay? Is there anything that we can help at the council or we can help personally as members? And that's been received really well. Peter?
Yeah, I think I would like to congratulate you and Michael on putting the stone on Front Street, remembering people we've lost over this virus. And I think that stands out a mile what this council believes in. There's people now who sit there, they take flowers round, and we put a management at home, put a little stall there, trolley, and everybody fills it with flowers, and it's got new flowers every week, and people do appreciate what this council do, and that, to me, stands out a mile. It's not, we didn't brag about it, we didn't shout it from the ice room, we just done it, and I think it's gone down extremely well in Ireland and throughout the borough, and I think you and Michael should be congratulated for doing it.
Thanks, Peter, and the department too moved that stone. I forget how much it weighs, about a couple of tons. But to actually put some sort of recognition and symbol, and we've certainly had a lot of emails, a lot of letters, a lot of phone calls from people who are very thankful for that. I think one thing we need to do, and not to let it slip off the agenda, not today's agenda, another agenda, is to make sure that we do, for people who are religious or humanist or whatever, that we do have a gathering there that covers all the multi-faiths that we've got throughout the borough as soon as it's safe to do so, but we'll await instructions which are quite mixed at the moment from government. Okay. Is anyone else? We're asked to approve that. That's on page 43. To be approved? Agreed. Thank you. So we're moving on fast now to agenda item 7, and it's 151 again. Me to you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Leader. This report, the Treasury Activity Outturn Report for 2020-21. Just for the benefit of the members, the term Treasury simply refers to the Council's investment and borrowing activity. As you can imagine, it's highly regulated, Local Government Act 2003, and there are also 2 specific SIPFA codes with which the Council needs to comply, the Treasury Management Code and the Prudential Code as well. Be aware that there are 3 kind of reports, different streams of reports we need to bring before members each year. not just to members, but to the wider community as well. There is a Treasury Management Strategy, which comes before Cabinet in February each year, and then gets referred on to Council the first week of March. There is also a mid-year report we're required to produce. This Council, we exceed that requirement. We do a quarterly report, which is over and above what we're required to do. And we're also required to do an outturn report. And it's the outturn report that is before members this afternoon. So, as has been spoken about in previous reports, of course, 2021 will always be known as kind of the year in which kind of COVID had a completely massive effect, not just on the country, but on the entire wider world. And in terms of Treasury management, there are a few kind of things happened there, particularly. You recall back in March 2020, the Chancellor reduced base rates down to an unprecedented 0.1%, 300-year lows. They've never been that low for centuries. And also as well, the Council, as has been alluded to earlier, significant amounts of income came in from central government, which officers had to kind of pay out as well to the local community. That had a huge impact on the Council's investments activity during the course of the year. And I'll pick up on that in just a couple of moments. I can report that, as set out in the report, the Council's overall debt levels didn't change over the course of the year. Our borrowing stayed exactly the same, just 9.8 million, just under 10 million. And our borrowing levels is constrained by something called our capital financing requirement, which is our underlying level to borrow, which at just over 10 million, our borrowings were below that, which meant we fully complied with that requirement. Most of our investments are done on a short-term basis, very, very short-term, highly liquid. We invest in the likes of money market funds, which are AAA rated, and we can get the money back very, very quickly, same day in most cases, which allows us to meet our outflows, such as creditors, salaries, and other payments that we're required to make. I can also report as well, we had no liquidity issues during the course of the year. We always had sufficient funds in our balances available to meet our outgoings, as I say, whether they be creditors, salaries, or other payments we're required to make. We can report we had no liquidity issues during the course of the year. The main body of the report kind of sets out a commentary of our activity during the course of the year. And just maybe one thing to note, members recall maybe in previous years, we've got one more long-term investment. We've got £1 million we put into a more long-term investment, a property fund, a couple of years ago. Obviously, with the pandemic, there were restrictions placed on that, but we always anticipated that will be a long-term investment, and we're going to stick to that kind of going forwards. Appendix 1 is a summary of the Council's, is a movement to the Council's borrowing and investments over the course of the year, from 1st of April 2020 down to 31st of March 2021. And you can see just track there, each different type of investment or borrowing and the movement between the two. And Appendix 2, spoke about earlier, that relates to the Council's Treasury Management and Prudential Indicators. Members set these at the start of the year, and us as officers, ultimately Alison, the Section 151 officer, has to make sure that the Council complies with those. All our activity is constrained within those indicators and limits. And we can report in Appendix 2 that we complied with that in full, 100%. And that's just all I kind of want to say at this stage, but I'd be more than happy to answer any questions from members. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Just before I ring Michael in, can I just ask on any money that we're borrowing or anything like that, are we looking at the way, you know, the ethnicity, is it? Ethnicity or whatever of it. So where, you know, are we sort of pulling back from the investment in fossil fuels and things like that? Sort of things that the Green Lobby will be saying to us, and quite rightly saying to us. Have we got an eye on that so that we make sure? I know it'll take a while to pull out of if we are locked into various things, but at least it will give us that direction.
Yeah, it's starting to get much kind of higher profile now, the whole ESG agenda, environmental, social and governance, yeah. The Treasury Management Code is going to be revised as well. A new version is coming out in December. In there, one of the requirements called the Treasury Management Practice is going to include something exactly about kind of environmental kind of factors. Again, we'll have to make sure that we comply with that going forwards. In terms of where we place our investments, it's kind of changing all the time. These companies are starting to get really on board now with the whole kind of ethical side of it. And of course, there's nothing in terms of actions, obviously we'll be paying attention to that going forwards. And we'll make sure that whatever we do is kind of in line with kind of strategy as set by the members each year. It's still kind of in its developing, really, is what I'm trying to say. And I think it'll kind of evolve going forwards. It's high profile. They realise now, these investment companies, the money market funds, they've got to get on board with the whole environmental, social, governance agenda. And we'll be kind of making sure that not just us, but other local authorities as well, making sure that what we do is in line with members' wishes and aspirations.
That's good to hear, because I'm reassured, because when I had a county council meeting earlier this week, there was a senior officer there trying to tell me that East Midlands Airport was zero free of carbon and all the rest of it. But what he was actually saying is that people who are going on long trips, or any trip in actual fact, are now paying a premium where they go and plant some trees somewhere else. It doesn't change the local environment and the well-being of the people there. So we do need to really get on board with this to make sure that we're as clear and as clean and as green as we possibly can within Gedling. Michael.
Just to thank Paul and Alison and the wider team, and particularly thank you to Paul for making what otherwise may appear to be a dry report quite interesting, and actually is important. And I think it's important that which Paul has done today, people are members, elected members who have got oversight of this and approval of this, actually understand the implications of the investments and activity within the year. So thank you for your presentation, Paul. Thank you to you and Alison for the report, but particularly thank you to the wider team for the work that goes on in the background within the year to financially keep the show on the road for the council. And it is tight, for the council. I know we're just about to talk about the outturn report in terms of the budget, and the reported relatively, it may sound like a big figure, relatively small in terms of the budget, in terms of underspend, but actually, I think I said earlier in the week, John, when I was talking to the scrutiny committee, during a pandemic, the worst health crisis in the country since the Second World War, landing a budget, on point is a bit like trying to land a parachute on a pinhead on Normandy Beach. It's quite a difficult job, and I think the fact that we have come so close, which we're going to talk about in the next report, is testament to the good financial management of officers, Paul, Alice, and the wider team. And I think that's demonstrated by the presentation Paul's given today in the report before us in terms of annual Treasury activity. So thank you, Paul, for your presentation. Nothing further to add, John.
Thanks, Michael. Anybody else?
I just make one further comment, but just to follow up the point that's just been made there. Spoke earlier about new versions of the Prudential and Treasury Management Code are coming out in December, with which we, Council and all local authorities, will need to comply. Of course, we spoke about it. It is, as just been pointed out, kind of a complex, highly regulated area, but the strategy is set by members in February each year and then by Council in March. And one of the things we'll be seeking to do kind of going forwards as well is with members in terms of member training, member development. One of the things the code requires us to do is to make sure that members are properly informed as they need to be. Because I say, it's not the officers that set the strategy, it's members. So what we'll be doing kind of going forwards as well, we'll be looking where possible to kind of do member training, in whatever form we could do that, put on sessions for members, in the way that suits members and their own kind of particular requirements as well. That's a requirement that we'll have, and we'll make sure as officers, Alice and myself, that we fully adhere to that.
Thanks for that reassurance. Anyone else? No, we're asked to approve, where are we? Approve this one, and this is going to full council next week. Do we agree? Thank you. On to page 79, which is agenda item 8, Senior Leadership Team. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Leader. So this report presents the budget outturn and budget carry forwards for 2021. So as you're all aware, the COVID pandemic has added a significant degree of complexity to our financial management processes during the year. And that complexity, I think, is evident throughout the report presented today, and which it's fair to say does require a little bit more of a detailed explanation than usual. So I ask you to bear with me as I go through it. So just starting first of all with the revenue budget, started on page 81. The council approved a net budget of £11.6 million for the year, and the table on page 82 details that outturn position, which shows an underspend of just under £275,000, which equates to 2.3%. However, that doesn't present the full picture. And you will also see in that table that our net portfolio budget is underspent by £3.6 million. And that's broadly offset by a movement on the usage of earmarked reserves, which has moved from an expected contribution from reserves of 1.3 million to a contribution to reserves of £2 million. So those proposed movements on earmarked reserves are fully detailed in paragraph 2.4, and I'll come back to that in more detail shortly. But what I can tell you is that it does include the reversal of the planned usage of reserves of £320,000, which was approved by Cabinet during the year to help Cabinet maintain its expenditure within the total approved budget, which we were exceeding due to COVID-related budget pressures. So I'm really pleased to confirm that we're no longer required to draw that money out of our reserves due to savings made elsewhere. So the major budget variances, which demonstrate the reasons for our underspend of £274,000 and then have enabled that reversal of the reserves of £320,000, are detailed fully in paragraph 2.3.2. They're mainly due to staff savings and income improvements that we've experienced since we reported at Q3. Staying with the table on page 82, that also shows an increased income in our financing budgets of the business rates and council tax. That totals, again, about £274,000. That is due to the earlier recognition of the government's COVID tax income guarantee funding. So we have budgeted for that to receive that within 21-22. So it's not new money, it's been recognised earlier. And the savings on the net council budget, together with the tax income guarantee funding, shows that we've got an additional contribution going into our general fund balance of £549,000. However, it is really important to note that that's not available to generally support any new spend going forward. And the reason for that is outlined in the report on page 82. So whilst we are recognising the tax income guarantee funding this year, the amount that we now expect to receive from that scheme is much lower than we've actually budgeted for in 21-22 by over £400,000. That's due to a bit of a change in the methodology for the scheme and for the calculation. So that, taken together with an increased business rates collection fund deficit for 2021, which doesn't get charged to the general fund balance until 21-22, indicates a shortfall of just over £500,000 against the estimate that we've got in the medium-term plan. So therefore, that additional transfer to general fund balance that you can see in the report will be required to offset that shortfall. And I've just, disappointingly, I've got to let you know that since writing the report, we've been notified of an error within the government's data collection for the tax income guarantee funding scheme as well. And so that's going to reduce that funding for us even further. So the net impact of that is going to be another reduction of £46,000. Again, it won't be accounted for until next year. But that £38,000 that's noted in the report as being available to support future expenditure plans effectively now isn't there. So it broadly brings us back into a neutral position on our medium-term plan expectations for our general fund balances. And so just turning now to page 86, which summarises the COVID impacts on our budget. So in terms of budget pressures, so the net position on that, they're all fully detailed from paragraph 2.3.3 through to 2.3.5, and they're summarised within the table at 2.3.6. That shows for us that our net cost of COVID is £384,000. As I say, that doesn't provide the full picture, and just for completeness, the further impacts of the budget, so noted just below the table. They're compared to the budgets that we have in related to the collection fund impacts, and also a required increase in bad debts provisions due to the suspension of sundry debtors' debt recovery due to the pandemic. So other COVID-related grants that we received for specific COVID-related activity are also included, summarised in paragraph 2.3.7. And Michael's just referred to a lot of this. So what we've received in total for specific activity that we've had to administer is £34 million. A lot of that is to do with the 15 different business grant schemes that we've administered. Some £28 million of that is which we've administered as mandatory grants on behalf of government. So they don't actually appear in our accounts or our budgets. We act as an agent on behalf of government as we administer those. But 6.3 million of the rest do relate to a range of other discretionary grants that we've received, including business grants. So the table on page 90 shows that some of the residual grant balances of £1 million are being transferred into earmarked reserves for use in 21-22. Just over half of that is to do with this additional restrictions grant funding, and I can confirm that all of that has now been paid to businesses. We also have the test and trace scheme, which is ongoing. So we are still continuing to make payments to our community who are having to self-isolate. And finally, there is some residual funds from the council tax hardship relief. We did actually, through our application of that scheme last year, apply the whole amount, but because of the nature of our housing benefit scheme, and what Michael referred to earlier, our very our 100% housing benefit scheme, some of that gets clawed back as circumstances change through the year. But that money is available for us, and we are working on developing a new scheme. So it's not going to be overly generous, but we will ensure that that all gets to individuals through this year. And so the grants have been administered from existing teams, as Michael referenced earlier. It's been an incredible effort by all staff. And for business grants, which were administered by Revenues, Financial Services and Customer Services as well, supported us through that. It has resulted in some normal business backlogs, and it's proposed to use some of that remaining administration funding, which we received towards the back end of last year, to impart to employ an interim debt recovery officer to help us get back on track with that, a property inspector for council tax and business rates, again to ensure that we're identifying all of optimising our income collection, and also to provide some additional backfilling support, as well as continuing to administer the business grant schemes, because we do still have another one of those to administer. The efficiency programme performance is detailed in paragraph 2.3.8. Not going to be a surprise to you that we've got a reasonable number of that amount of that deferred. So we've got a shortfall of 322,000 against a budget expectation of 800,000. But 263 of that we do expect to still deliver as we move forward. So just turning now to our earmarked reserves and provisions. The proposed movements are detailed in paragraphs 2.4 and 2.5, and these are recommended to you today for approval. For earmarked reserves at 2.4, as I've already said, the balance on earmarked reserves is £3.3 million higher than the current estimate, and that's mainly due to the impact of COVID. So we've got new grants and income of just under £1.5 million. £284,000 of that is actually due to the share of the business rates pool surplus, which always comes through to us. We don't find out what that's going to be until after year end, but that's available for us to invest in economic regeneration activity. We've got underspends in one-off budgets for specific projects, which we were expecting to go ahead with. So they've been deferred, so we'll be drawing those back out in the current financial year. And we do have some savings, which were savings in staffing, as we've been focused on some of that specific grant-related activity in public protection and community relations for the contain outbreak management. And the staffing savings that we've had there is, as we want to put into reserve, so as we can undertake some of that backlog and backfill requirements that we need to complete this financial year. And of course, we've got the reversal of the planned use of reserves that I've already spoken about, which we were expecting to need to use to cover COVID pressures. So turning to provisions at paragraph 2.5, these must be made where an event's taken place that the council has an obligation that probably requires settlement, but where the timing's uncertain. The main provision for the council for that one is the business rates appeals, and we've reviewed our needs for that, and we're proposing an increase of £125,000. And the increased provisions for housing benefit and sundry debtor bad debts are increased by £42,000 and £130,000 respectively. And that's mainly due to an increase in both the amount and the age of debts, again, due to the suspension of debt recovery activity due to the COVID pandemic. So just to summarise, I think given the extent of the financial challenges that the council has faced, we were facing significant challenges anyway, but with COVID added on top, I think this does present a robust outturn position for us, which whilst not giving us increasing general fund balances further to support future expenditure plans, does give us increased earmark reserves as fully detailed in Appendix 2. So if we can just turn now finally to the capital outturn, which is on page 98. Capital outturn totals £2.3 million compared to an approved budget of 4.1, an underspend of £1.8 million. That's all now proposed for carry forwards to 21-22. And the full list of schemes is detailed in the report. Of that 1.8 million, £658,000 has been approved by myself as Chief Financial Officer in line with delegation arrangements, and the remaining 1.1 million are those requiring council approval, and all of them are listed in Appendix 6. The proposed financing of the capital programme is detailed in paragraph 3.4 and includes the use of capital receipts, capital grants and contributions, and just a minor requirement for borrowing this year of £270,000. The capital determinations that we're required to make by regulations to determine the financing of capital expenditure and the revenue provision for the repayment of debt is detailed at paragraph 3.5, and that's proposed for referral to council for approval. So I'll leave it there, Leader. The recommendations are fully set out on page 80, and I'll be happy to try and answer any questions.
Thanks, thanks, Sir Alison. Yeah, it's Henry's fault. We've gone 8,000 over, is it, Felicity? Keep pushing. Michael.
Yeah, just thank you to Alison for comprehensive report, and comprehensive report, but I don't think it really gives credit to Alison, to Paul, to the wider team about the hard work that's gone on, and the more complicated work because of the pandemic. And Paul made reference to it earlier, funds coming in and funds going out of the council often in quick time, and the teams have had to be fleet of foot. And actually, I don't think it's a particularly bad position for us to be in, really. Who knows what's going to happen in terms of the comprehensive spending review that keeps being trailed by the government, and who knows what's going to happen in terms of settlement. We've made our case very strongly, John, to the MP and indeed to the Minister directly about some of the inbuilt felt unfairnesses in terms of the way that Gedling seems to get treated compared to other places in the country. And, I'm not making a party political point here. They are self-evident truths borne out by evidence, and it's not our own measurements, it's the government measurements that count that Gedling still remains the worst affected council in the country in terms of core spending power, which was the mechanism that the government devised to try and illustrate resources available to local authorities for the activities that they need to carry out for their communities and residents. So I think we've got to continue to press the case with both our members of Parliament and with ministers to make sure that in some way, shape or form that is turned around, whether that's whether we're going to see a return of some sort of revenue support grant. I won't hold my breath on that point, or whether there can be some changes in terms of some of the other grants that recognise that Gedling has got significant areas of very severe deprivation that are often masked by the government's own figures, the fact that they sit within super output areas that are wider communities. So the deprivation, if you like, in Gedling gets masked in a way that perhaps you wouldn't see for other communities that might stand out in league tables as being more deprived. So that's a future piece, John, and I think we need to keep up the lobbying as a council on central government to try and get a turnaround, because as Alison says, the long and short is that we're on a whisker in terms of the general fund, which allows little wiggle room for manoeuvre in terms of day-to-day future expanding in terms of spending day-to-day expenditure. But I think that, the positive outcome from the report is, as Alison says, a significant increase in earmarked reserves, and I think it's very clearly laid out for our approval today what they're intended to be used, for in the commentary in 2.4 onwards, in terms of the report. The one point I just wanted clarification on from Alison. I think I heard you right, Alison, but sorry, it's been quite a distance from you in wearing masks in the chamber. Is you made reference to the point about the error in the data. The government's data projections in terms of the tax income guarantee. And I thought I heard you right in saying that there'd been an error and that the figures in the report were correct, though. Or is that not the case? And if it's not the case, I presume, therefore, that the final commentary in 2.1 on page H3 of the report that says this leaves a sum of 38,000 available to support future expenditure plans. If I heard you right and you said that there's an additional 40-something thousand, does that take us below the line in terms of the figures to a negative couple of thousand? If I've heard you correct, it'd just be helpful for the record if that was set out. And what was this error by the government? Was it human error, or was it a reporting error, or just if you could say a little bit more about that? But overall, John, I think the point I'm making is that officers should be commended. I think it's a decent position to be in, and we need to make sure that we're continuing to keep pressure on the government to see, a turnaround. And just in the point about capital expenditure that Alison makes at the end, which obviously is not insignificant, and the council still has resources to deploy. We can see that at the moment in terms of work that's going on where, as Councillor Hollingsworth said earlier, we're working in partnership on the Carlton Square redevelopment or the Arnold Market or other developments that are happening around the borough in terms of temporary accommodation. We have obviously submitted, as a council, a levelling up application and bid to the government as part of the 4.6 billion, I think it is, levelling up fund that the Chancellor outlined a few months ago. Very, very proud of the collective efforts of the council in putting that bid in. Very, very proud, John, of the leadership that you've shown as a leader. I thought it was a disgrace 2 weeks ago to see the Member of Parliament stand up in the chamber in the Commons and single out two officers in Gedling Borough, the Chief Executive and Joel Davis, who absolutely deserve our commendation for the work that they've done. But this is a team effort. It's a team effort by every single officer in this council, and I thought it was an absolute disgrace and below his office that he chose to do that, and that was replicated by the Prime Minister in response in Prime Minister's questions. We shouldn't be seeking to divide on these issues. We should be working together, because we've seen earlier on in the grants that were handed out by ministers with no proper application process in terms of the Towns Fund, where towns were hand-picked, and you don't have to take my word for it. Read the National Audit Office report that very clearly showed that ministers were choosing constituencies that were marginal in advance of the 2019 general election to try and support those communities with significant sums of money, £25 million apiece on some occasions, and Gedling did not get a whisker out of it. So not only have we got a challenge in terms of the day-to-day expenditure and the fact that we're the worst affected council in the country in terms of the government's own measurement, which is core spending power, but there's a twin issue, if you like, which is that we're being overlooked in terms of one-off monies for capital expenditure as well. So I think next time we see the Member of Parliament, he ought to apologise for what I thought was a really, really underhand remark that he made in Prime Minister's questions. Yes, the council should be commended, but this is a team effort, and it's a team effort by all officers and through the leadership that you have shown, John. And I thought what was deeply disappointing was you and I sat in a meeting with the Member of Parliament and the Chief Executive and Joel Davis and said that this was not going to be a partisan issue and that we were going to work together and issue a joint press release, only a week later to see him on his feet in the House of Commons singling out two officers. I really, really was disappointed about it, and I'm not going to make any apologies for being direct about it. I think it's below his office, and I think it does nothing for the borough and for working relationships with the Member of Parliament. I hope what will now happen in quick order, and I hope what he'll spend a little bit more time doing rather than getting on his feet in the House of Commons and making such remarks, is that we actually see some money forthcoming from the Prime Minister and Chancellor in terms of the Levelling Up Fund, so that places like Arnold and Carlton and Netherfield and Mapley Plains and Ravenshead and Burton Joyce and the other towns and villages that we represent can actually now start to get a fair share of the cake, can get back on their feet, and can start to recover from this absolutely horrific pandemic in terms of the impact that it's had on our communities and businesses. But I'll just finish by saying, John, a remarkable job by everybody in terms of the budget outturn position that we see, not just the finance colleagues, but everybody in the council. Tight financial management in budgets, making sure that we were doing everything we could to support communities, individuals, families and businesses throughout the pandemic, I think shows the council at its absolute best. And I know councils sometimes come under for criticism, but this is a relatively small organisation in the grand scheme of things. You can see an £11 million budget there, but it's had absolutely millions coming through the door and going out of the door, John, this year, as you well know, because you've approved most of the schemes in terms of the business grants as they've come through. So it's been a tough year, really, really difficult year, but I think people should be commended. And I really, really hope that we will be recognised by the government for the work that we're doing. I really do think we're a financially well-led council, and I don't take credit for that, John, and I know you don't seek to take credit as a leader of council as well. That's as a result of professionalism by officers, and I hope that that is recognised when it comes to the comprehensive spending review, and that our communities get treated in a fair, even-handed way at the rest of the country. That is all they're asking for. We're not asking for special treatment. We're not even asking to be top of the list. We're just asking to be treated fairly. That is all our residents want. So I think I've made my case, John, and I'll finish there. But if Alice can just clarify in terms of the error, that would be very helpful.
Yes, I can confirm it was an administrative error within the return that we have to make to government. So not our error. We have to use what we call the NNDR 3 return, and in the methodology for the TIG calculation, they only selected one of those boxes when they should have selected two of the boxes on that return. And the impact of that has meant that our overall funding has reduced in a net position by £46,000. So we've got a TIG expectation of 253. So that's going to come down. So I don't propose to change the accounts for last year. So we will make that adjustment in the new financial year, but it is a reduction, bringing us broadly into a neutral position.
Thanks, Alison. Peter?
I take Michael's point. I watched our MP on television at that Prime Minister's question time, and I was absolutely disgusted in his attitude. This council's got nothing compared with Broxtowe, Newark and Sherwood, the city, Rushcliffe, and yet we do as good a job as any of them in the county. And I think it was a disgrace the way they've treated Gedling Borough Council. I've been on this council, as most of you know, a long, long time, and we've got treated worse and worse as we've got better. And I think it's a disgrace the way they treat Gedling.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I mean, following on really from that, and we'll probably all speak about it, but having spent the frustrations that Mike was expressing, particularly we went on a Friday night to accommodate the MP, and we sat around for the best part, 2 hours? We saw a presentation presented by our officers that we hadn't seen. That's how open we were. We hadn't seen that presentation, and we agreed there that this, and emphasised it, was this is not party bashing. This is getting our fair share of some of this cake that seems to be dished out to lots of other places. It wasn't being mardy about it. We put forward a practical case. But I have since then read in detail the levelling up plan and how it's put forward. And I do have to praise the officers. Often have a bit of a banter with economic development and say, have you done this, have you done that? But when you see the amount of work that goes in and the questions which are repeated, they're far worse than the European, trying to apply for money in Europe. They repeat. But I say, hopefully they're not going to do this continue, because it will put us all in our own silos and we'll all be chucking things about. At the end of the day, the people will get bored with it. We were trying to do this completely on a united front so that we showed we can work together. There is some sense goes off in, apart from what you see and, all the things that go off in Parliament and sometimes in the County Council and sometimes here, that we can move forward. Very, very disappointed to see, because it would have been an absolute gift for the MP to stand up, or the Prime Minister, and says, this is how we're working together, this is how a Labour authority is working with the Tory government. There was nothing wrong in saying that, but they didn't get there. So it's very disappointed. Hopefully it won't happen in the future, but I'm sure there's something will crop up and there'll be political points scored. We don't want that. We want some money to keep improving the quality of people's lives in Gedling. And again, I reiterate my thanks to all, from right the way across the people, from finance right the way through to economic development, for the effort that's gone into putting that levelling up plan. And I do believe, I think it's about a month's time, we should know whether it bears any fruit or not. Thank you. Anybody else? If there aren't, we're asked, this was another one that's going to council. It's on page 79. Are we agreed? Thank you. And then we just move on to the work report. Is there anything on that one? Viv?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I just wanted to check with Alison in terms of the forward plan. Are we expecting to see the equality and diversity to go on to the forward plan? I can't see it on there.
Yeah, I'll add it on, Councillor McCrossan. We just wait for the end of the consultation and then hopefully we'll be in for October. I think that's what we agreed, wasn't it?
Yeah, okay, thank
you. We're just asked to note that. I will say that for those who don't know, but the next council meeting will be in here. So it will be a bit tight, but we'll have the doors open and hopefully we can do something, because it is difficult. If everyone, I know we need the masks, and I've not got mine on now because I'm continually on to be on and off like a yo-yo. But we need to try and get through that meeting as quickly as possible. But it is in this building. They had asked that to go into the Bonington, but a lot of resentment to that when we had the EC of the group the other night, etc. There's a feeling it was too tight, and I personally thought that as well. So we're in here next week, which will be a change for us, won't it? So anyway, with that, I think unless there's any other business, there's none notified. Thank everyone, and the IT can switch off. Thank you.